Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the Last Supper and the temptation in the garden. Matthew chapter 26, beginning in verse 1, when Jesus had finished all these words, he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man is to be handed over for crucifixion." Now, Jesus has already said this on three different occasions. Matthew, Mark, and Luke have all talked about how Jesus, on three occasions, has given a testimony, has said that he's going to go to Jerusalem, he is going to be arrested, he'll be crucified, and he will rise again from the dead. He's saying it again now. Verse 3, then the chief priests and the elders of the people were gathered together in the court of the high priest named Caiaphas. We're going to see Caiaphas later on. And they plotted together to seize Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they were saying, not during the feast. Otherwise, a riot might occur among the people. So they've decided to go ahead and try to murder Jesus, but they're going to do it at a later time. They're going to postpone it for right now because of the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread and all of the people that have gathered in Jerusalem. Next we have, and notice I've put all four accounts, although I'm not necessarily sure they're all telling exactly the same story. Matthew speaks of how when Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster vial of very costly perfume. Mark essentially tells the same story. Notice Bethany's mentioned, Simon the leper is mentioned, they're reclining at a table, and the woman comes with a vial. Skip over to John on the far right. John chapter 12, verse 1. Jesus, therefore, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So notice Lazarus is mentioned there. Earlier, we saw Simon the leper in Matthew and Mark. But this is taking place at around the same time. And of course, it could be that he went into two different homes around that time, but it sounds like the same event. On the other hand, Luke chapter 7, Luke is telling his story much earlier in the life of Jesus. And he says one of the Pharisees, later on he's going to refer to him as Simon, was requesting him to dine with him. And he had entered the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. So at first, all four accounts look like they're telling the same story, but Luke's account is taking place earlier, at least he's describing it earlier. Now remember, sometimes the gospel accounts don't necessarily give us a chronological sequence. Sometimes they're giving us a topical sequence. So is this one of those times? Let's look a little further. In Matthew 26, the woman is not named, but there's a conversation about the cost of perfume as she comes and puts it on Jesus. Mark chapter 14, we find out that some of the disciples were scolding the woman because of the cost of perfume, and Jesus says to let her alone. In Luke's account, the woman is said to have been a sinner. Now, that's not mentioned in Matthew, Mark, or John. No mention is made of the cost of perfume, which makes me wonder if perhaps, I don't want to say for sure, but perhaps this is a different event that took place much earlier. Um, and and I can't help but think if it's a different event, maybe that earlier event had inspired this later event. The woman got the idea from what had taken place earlier. In John's account, we have Mary named as the woman. And it's Judas Iscariot who asks about the cost of the perfume. And we're told it's not that he was interested in, he says that money could have been given to the poor. You find out he really didn't care about the poor, but he had been stealing some of the money. In Matthew and Mark, we're told that her anointing is said to be for the burial of Jesus. Luke doesn't mention that. Instead, in Luke, she is told that her sins have been forgiven. And John's account likewise follows Matthew and Mark in saying that it is for the burial of Jesus. But think about this: if he is anointed and it's for his burial, and remember he's going to be buried toward the end of the week. But when he's buried, he'll have already been anointed, which means when we read about Jesus in the upper room, and then later on at Gethsemane, and in the trials, and maybe even on the cross, that all throughout, if you had used your olfactory senses, if you had taken a sniff of the air, there was something sweet There was a sweet aroma just around. From where did that come? And maybe it's a picture that through all of this, Jesus is doing the will of the Father. Matthew 26:14, then one of the 12, named Judas Iscariot, this is after he's apparently been rebuffed, he goes to the chief priests and said, "What are you willing to give me to betray him to you?" And they weighed out 30 pieces of silver to him, and from then on he began looking for a good opportunity to betray Jesus. So the stage is set for the betrayal. Next, we move to the Last Supper. And here we begin with the preparation, Matthew 26:17. Now, on the first day of the unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover?" First day of unleavened bread would begin this whole week where leaven is going to be taken out of their food. But it would begin, first of all, with the coming of the Passover. And that would require a meal. And they're asking, where do we want to do this? You're in Bethany, in Jerusalem. What are the arrangements? And I can almost imagine Judas listening in, trying to get the address, because after all, he's already planning on betraying Jesus. And so, verse 18, notice how Jesus gives the instructions. He doesn't say, go to 1800 Sycamore Street in Jerusalem. No, he says, go into the city to a certain man. Actually, we have in one of the other accounts, you're going to go look for a man carrying a water pot. I don't know if there were a lot of men carrying water pots, so was that an unusual thing, perhaps? But go to a certain man and say to him, the teacher says, my time is near. I am to keep the Passover at your house with my disciples. The man, as far as we know, is not named. And that means that Judas doesn't have the address. And that means that the Passover, the Last Supper, will not be interrupted by those coming to arrest Jesus. Verse 7, then came the first day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. And Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, go, now we switched over to Luke's account, go and prepare the Passover for us that we may eat it. And they said, where do you want us to prepare? What's the address? And he said to them, here it is, when you have entered the city, a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him into the house that he enters, and you shall say to the owner of the house, the teacher says to you, where's the guest room? Now, that term guest room is the same word in the Greek text that we saw back in Luke chapter 2 when Jesus was born and laid in a manger because there was no room in the, and our translation said in, but actually it's the same word here. There was no room in the guest room. Exactly the same term here. Well, where is the guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large furnished upper room. Prepare it there. And so, like I said, Judas doesn't know where it's going to be, but there's going to be this upper room that will be used. Now, when we get to the description of the Last Supper, we're going to see some interesting arrangements about the way people are seated, people leaning on each other. And what you have here is a picture of what's called a triclinium. This one happens to be in Pompeii. But we're going to see pictures of others as well. It was a very regular sort of affair for formal dining. And you say, well, do you sit on those little benches? Those are not the benches. No, this middle space is where the servant or slave would bring the food, and then the people would lie all around it. See how the ground on this one is sloped a bit so that their feet can be toward a little lower and their heads a little higher. And then around the rim of that, people will have their elbows. They'll sort of lean up there, and the food can be brought to them without having to pass it over anybody. And so they'd be reclining all around this. It's sort of like a U-shaped table. But notice they're part of the table. They actually lie on part of the table. Verse 5, then he poured water into the basin. So before they sit down to eat, he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. Now, John, in his account, is not going to make mention of the bread and the wine. Instead, he's going to focus on this event the washing of the disciples' feet and some of the teaching that Jesus does. Verse 6, so he came to Simon Peter. He said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? And Jesus answered and said to him, what I do, you do not realize now, but you will understand hereafter. Peter said to him, never shall you wash my feet. You see, washing somebody's feet, that was considered rather base. That was considered rather low. In fact, that was considered so low that even most slaves were not required to do this kind of action. And so Peter says, never shall you wash my feet. And Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Notice how Simon Peter goes to the other extreme. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, then wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head. And Jesus said to him, he was bathed, needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. And that's a hint. We already know what's happening behind the scenes. Verse 11, for he knew the one who was betraying him. Notice how Judas Iscariot's betrayal doesn't take Jesus by surprise. And for this reason, he said, John's explaining to us, not all of you are clean. Now, what we have, and I'm not going to go through the entire, it's a number of chapters, but he washes their feet. This is all in the Gospel of John, beginning chapter 13. And then he gives a prophecy in verse 36. He says, I'm leaving, and Simon Peter said, Lord, where are you going? And he says, well, where I go, you cannot follow me, but you will follow me later. And Peter says, I'll follow you wherever. And Jesus says, no. Are you going to lay down your life for me? Truly, I say to you, a rooster will not crow until you deny me 3 times. And then Jesus picks up that thread about how he's leaving. And Thomas says, well, Lord, we don't know where you're going. And Jesus says, no, I do know. You do know the way, because I am the way and the truth and the life, and no one comes to the Father but through me. But I'm leaving you one behind, and the Father will take care of you. He's going to provide for all of your needs. Verse 14, if you ask anything in my name, I'll do it. And if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. Next, he promises to send them a helper. Verse 16, I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper besides myself, and that he may be with you forever. That is the Spirit of truth. And he speaks about this helper, verse 26, but the helper, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he'll teach you all things and bring to your remembrance all that I said to you. Next, Jesus warns that the ruler of the world is coming, and that's going to be a dangerous thing. So prepare. Don't let your heart be troubled, but be ready for this one who is coming. Chapter 15, he comes to sort of the pivotal point in this entire section where he says, I am the vine, you are the branches, abide in me, because just like a branch has to abide in the vine to have life, you have to abide in me, and you have to abide in my love. And then he warns again. He's talked already about how the ruler of the world is coming, and now he talks about how persecution is coming and how you will be hated just as I have been hated. And so be ready for that. A promise of a helper again. This reference again, beginning in verse 7. He says, but I tell you the truth. It is to your advantage that I go, but if I don't go away, the helper will not come to you. But if I go, I will send him to you. And so this helper is going to be coming. He's referred to again in verse 13. But when he, the Spirit of truth, comes, he'll guide you into all truth, and he's going to speak through you. He says, remember how earlier he had said he's leaving, and God and the Father will provide. He says this again, I'm leaving, and that's okay, because I'm going to provide, and God will provide. And until now, he says in verse 24, actually, let me go back to verse 23, where he says, truly, truly, I say to you, if you ask the Father for anything in my name, he will he will give it to you. He'll provide for you. Until now, you've asked for nothing in my name. Ask and you will receive, so that your joy might be made full. And then he gives another prophecy of the denial, not just of Peter, but how they will they will all be scattered. And then we come full circle in chapter 17, where he serves the disciples once again. Remember how this all started by him washing the feet of the disciples. And now we read of Jesus praying for his disciples in this wonderful prayer of John chapter 17. Meanwhile, back in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, notice how they take a very different tact. You'd almost think it might not be the same meal. It is, but they're focusing on different things that were said. Verse 20, now when evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table. Here's another triclinium. You have many of them all throughout the ancient world. And they were reclining at the table with the 12 disciples. As they were eating, he said, truly I say to you that one of you will betray me. Being deeply grieved, they each one began to say to him, surely not I, Lord. Notice they begin to wonder, gee, am I the one? Now, only one had actually planned on doing it, but the others, frankly, sort of know their own heart. They hadn't planned on betraying him, but they wonder, could it be me? Might I end up being not faithful enough? And he answered, he who dipped his hand with me in the bowl is the one who will betray me. The Son of Man is to go just as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had not been born. So there's a hint about who it's going to be. Not everybody had perhaps seen who did the dipping, and because they're gathered around, but they're maybe wondering and talking with each other. And so I think maybe some of them have missed, but some maybe have seen and now begin to wonder. Verse 25, and Judas, who was betraying him, said, surely it was not I, Rabbi. And Jesus said to him, you have said it yourself. Now notice how he says that. That's understood as an affirmative. It's a little bit roundabout, but it's understood. Yes, it is you. Now, verse 26, when they were eating, Jesus took some of the bread. Now, by this time, it seems that Judas has left. In fact, in one of the other accounts, Jesus says, that what you're going to do quickly. And so Judas leaves, and not all the other disciples understand what Jesus is speaking about or where he's going. Some of them think, well, maybe he's sort of the treasurer for the group. Maybe he's got to go pay for the room or give some money to the poor, or because Judas had talked about that earlier. But while they were eating, Jesus took some bread, and after a blessing, he broke it and gave it to his disciples and said, take, eat, this is my body. Now, his body was right there. I mean, his physical body was right there. So it represents his body. He's with them. It's bread, but it's representing something more than just merely bread. It's representative of his body. And notice we continue, when he had taken a cup and given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for forgiveness of sins. But I say to you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. So here he eats and he drinks, and the cup represents the blood. And notice how they're going to eat that which represents his body. They are going to drink that which represents his blood, as if to partake of him. They are eating him. They are drinking him. They are nourishing themselves on him. What they are doing is they are acting out their faith. What does it mean to believe in Jesus? It means to eat him. It means to drink him. It means to make him, through faith, a part of yourself. Verse 30, after singing a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Now, to get to the Mount of Olives, they were somewhere in Jerusalem, so they're going to have to pass through Jerusalem. Of course, it's in the middle of the night, so they're able to do this. And they're heading down at least to the lower slopes of the Mount of Olives. And they get here, Matthew 26:36, when Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane. Now, the term Gethsemane means oil press. And it just so happens there are, on the lower slopes of the Mount of Olives, there are some very ancient, now they're not as ancient as Jesus, but they might be almost as ancient, maybe to within 100 years or a little bit more. So these very ancient olive trees, and remember, Gethsemane means oil press. The oil is not from like motor oil. The oil is from olives that it's referencing. So maybe this place was a place where they would grow these olive trees, but also maybe there was an oil press there. Could be. We're not told that's the case. And he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, so this is Peter, James, and John, and began to be grieved and distressed. Then he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved." Notice how grieved is mentioned twice here, "to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me." Now, Jesus has been very calm, very, very ordered, but now something troubling comes over him because he's facing the cross, and he knows it. Verse 39, and he went a little beyond them and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup," remember, he's just drank a cup with his disciples. He said, "Here, drink of this. This represents my blood. And now, my Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me." This is the cup of suffering. I think perhaps even more, the cup, can I call it this? The cup of the wrath of God, because he is going to be treated while he is on the cross as though he is a guilty sinner. He will be treated. He will be the sins of all of us will be credited to him upon the cross. And he looks at that cup and he says, "Can we do this another way?" But notice what he adds, "Yet not as I will, but as you will." He is here to do the will of the Father. Verse 40, and he came to the disciples and found them sleeping and said to Peter, "So you men could not keep watch with me for 1 hour? Keep watching and praying that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." He went away again a second time, and prayed, saying, "My Father, if this cannot pass away," notice the slight difference in prayer. The first prayer was, "If there's any other way, then can we do that other way? But if not, then not my will, but your will." This time, it assumes, notice there's an if clause, but it's a different kind of if clause. It's an if clause, and it assumes that this cannot pass away unless I drink it. So there's an assumption that is now being made. In a sense, the first prayer has been answered, but he says, "If it cannot pass away until I drink it, then your will be done." The first prayer had been a request. The second prayer is a prayer of submission. Verse 43, again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. Sometimes I think, if you want to figure out a way to go to sleep, start praying for a long time. And sometimes that works to put you to sleep. Sometimes it works to keep you up. I can't think of a better way to spend your time. Verse 44, and he left them again and went away and prayed a third time, saying the same thing once more. So we have actually not one, not two, but three prayers. Verse 45, then he came to the disciples and said, "Are you still sleeping and resting?" So we're sort of 3 for 3. "Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. Behold, the one who betrays me is at hand." And now comes Judas. We'll look at that next time. What I want to see here is an interesting contrast and comparison between the first Adam, who, after all, came to a garden versus Jesus, the last Adam, who comes to this place where he is put to the test. Adam had been placed into a garden. Jesus comes to this garden by the name of Gethsemane. Adam was tempted to eat. Jesus is tempted to bypass the cup, to bypass the cross. In Adam's case, he failed his temptation, and in doing so, he plunged the world into sin and into death. By contrast, Jesus resisted his temptation, and in doing so, he goes to the cross and frees the world from the curse of sin, from the curse of death, by taking that curse upon himself and dying in our place.